A boardroom in a Texas skyscraper, air conditioning humming, leather chairs, marble floors, and one man sitting there in a white 10-gallon Stetson like he walked in from a cattle drive? Every villain on primetime television in the 1980s had a signature, a scar, a laugh, a car, a catchphrase. J.R. Ewing had a hat, and he refused to take it off. Not in his office, not at dinner, not even in bed, in some scenes. There was a reason, and it had almost nothing to do with Texas. It had to do with something viewers never noticed. For 13 seasons on CBS, that white Stetson entered a room before Larry Hagman did. You could hear the boots. You could hear the voice, that slow, honeyed drawl. But the first thing the camera showed was almost always that brim, cutting across the frame at a slight tilt, catching studio light in a way that seemed to announce trouble before a single line of dialogue landed. South Fork Ranch? The oil money boardroom? The porch at dawn? The hat was there for all of it. And most viewers, sitting in their wood-paneled living rooms on a Friday night at 9, never once stopped to ask why a Texas oil man would wear a cowboy hat to a business meeting on the 40th floor of a glass skyscraper. The truth is, the hat was not really a costume. It was a tool. Hagman figured that out early, and so did the crew around him. The brim controlled where the audience looked. Tilt it down, and JR became a threat. Push it back, and he became a charmer. Take it off, and something inside the scene shifted, because the hat had been doing part of the acting the whole time. Wardrobe treated it with the same care usually reserved for a lead performer. There were backups, there were doubles for stunt shots, there was a routine before every take. Viewers thought the hat was pure Texas flavor, the same kind of shorthand that put 10-gallon hats on old Western heroes 20 years earlier. It was actually a visual mechanic hiding in plain sight. But there was a second reason Hagman kept it on. And that one started long before Dallas was ever pitched to a single network executive. If you were watching television in the late 1960s, you knew Larry Hagman as somebody else entirely. He was Major Anthony Nelson on I Dream of Jeannie, clean-cut, hatless, all-American, an astronaut in a jumpsuit, sharing a Florida house with a magical blonde in pink harem pants, running through the same misunderstanding every week and coming out smiling. That show ran for 5 seasons on NBC. And by the end of it, Hagman had a problem most working actors would call a blessing and a curse in the same sentence. He had become the nice guy, the friendly husband, the straight man to a sitcom fantasy. Casting directors saw one thing when he walked in the room, and it was not a villain. When the pilot for Dallas came around in 1978, Hagman understood something that a lot of actors in his position miss. He needed a visual weapon, something the audience would see in the first 10 seconds and never confuse with Major Nelson again. So he engineered J.R. Ewing from the outside in. The smirk, the walk, the drawl, and the hat. Especially the hat. It was the loudest possible statement he could make with his body before he even opened his mouth. He was, in effect, dressing over his own past. Behind the scenes, that was a deliberate escape plan. J.R. Ewing was not just a character. He was Larry Hagman climbing out of a decade of Hollywood pigeonholing, and using one accessory to do it. And that escape depended on the hat more than any script page anyone would ever hand him. Now here's the part that surprises people. Most of Dallas was not filmed at South Fork. Not the interiors, not the boardroom scenes, not the endless close-ups of JR pouring bourbon at his desk, while somebody's world quietly ended in front of him. The exterior shots of that white-fenced ranch, the pool, the long driveway, all of that was filmed in Texas at what fans came to know as South Fork Ranch outside Parker, north of Dallas. But the interiors, the offices, the bedrooms, the kitchens, the places where most of the actual drama happened week to week, were shot on soundstages in California. For most of the show's run, the world J.R. Ewing lived inside was a Los Angeles soundstage wearing Texas clothes. That created a problem, because a Burbank stage does not automatically look like Dallas. The light is wrong, the air is wrong. The distance to the horizon does not exist beyond a painted backdrop. Production leaned on wardrobe to sell the geography, boots, belt buckles, big collared shirts, wide lapels, turquoise and gold, and on Hagman, always, that white Stetson. The hat kept JR looking like Texas even when he was standing 3 feet from a coffee cart in California. It was, quietly, one of the most important visual props on the entire series, which raised a second issue, one the cinematographers understood immediately. Because in soundstage lighting, a cowboy hat does something very specific. If you watch old Dallas episodes now, look at JR's eyes, not his face, his eyes. There is almost always a soft shadow across them. A dark band, just enough to hide expression, just enough to make you lean forward slightly to read what he is thinking. That shadow was not painted on, it was the hat. Studio lighting in the late 1970s and 1980s was harsh and top-heavy, big instruments hanging from the grid, pushing light straight down onto actors. On most performers, that lighting is unflattering. It hollows out the eyes and flattens the face. On J.R. Ewing, wearing a wide-brimmed Stetson, that same overhead light hit the brim first and left a natural shadow across the upper half of his face. He looked more menacing, more mysterious, more powerful, and the crew did not need to add a single extra lighting rig to get there. Directors of photography, in interviews over the years, have talked about how efficient it was on a working production floor. The hat did half the mood work for them. It meant faster setups, fewer adjustments between scenes, a more consistent look across scenes shot weeks apart on different stages. From a production standpoint, the hat was not just character. It was budget, it was schedule, it was tone control built into a wardrobe piece. Viewers at home saw a man who looked like trouble. What they were actually seeing was optics. JR's intimidating presence was partly a lighting trick that Hagman and the crew had figured out and refused to break, episode after episode, season after season. But the hat was doing something else too. Something that had less to do with the camera and more to do with the audience. In fact, more to do with an audience Hagman probably never expected when he first showed up to read for the pilot. By the early 1980s, Dallas was not just a hit in the United States. It was a global export on a scale that surprised even CBS. The show aired in dozens of countries, reportedly reaching viewers on nearly every continent, dubbed into languages Hagman could not speak, playing in markets where the concept of a Texas oil dynasty was pure exotic fantasy. It ran on primetime in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Brazil, in Australia. Reports at the time claimed it was airing in one form or another in more than 90 countries. And in those markets, the audience often could not follow every plot twist. The dialogue was translated, sometimes loosely, the subplots got tangled in the dubbing, the character names blurred together. But the hat translated instantly. In a Brazilian living room, in a French apartment, in a British pub with the television playing over the bar, viewers who could not tell you a single line JR had spoken still knew who he was the second that silhouette crossed the frame. Wide brim, white crown, slight tilt. That was the villain. That was the man everyone was arguing about at the office the next morning. The hat was the show's flag. Instant identification. No subtitles required. In television terms, it was one of the cleanest pieces of visual branding of the entire decade. That is not a costume choice. That is a branding choice. And in international syndication terms, it was worth an enormous amount of money. CBS started noticing something strange in the mail too. Fan letters were arriving with drawings of the hat alone. Kids in other countries were sending in crayon sketches of nothing but a white Stetson floating above a shirt collar or a coffee cup, and the network knew exactly which character it meant. No caption needed, no name spelled out, just the shape. That level of visual recognition, for a supporting antagonist on a nighttime soap that had barely been running for 2 years, was almost unheard of in that era of network television, when a show usually needed a decade of reruns before its imagery became that portable. Then came the moment that turned all of it into legend. March 21, 1980, the episode called A House Divided. J.R. Ewing, alone in his office at night, shot by an unseen figure, cut to black, and for the entire summer, the world lost its mind. Who shot JR became the question people asked in checkout lines. T-shirts appeared, bumper stickers appeared, tabloids ran daily speculation. Bookmakers in Britain took bets on the answer. The cliffhanger stretched across an actor's strike and a production delay that pushed the resolution deep into the fall, and by the time viewers finally got the answer that November in an episode called Who Done It, more than 80 million Americans reportedly tuned in for the reveal. It became one of the most watched television broadcasts in United States history, and in every piece of promotional artwork, every magazine cover, every newspaper illustration selling that mystery, the hat was there. Sometimes without Hagman's face at all, just the Stetson, cocked at that familiar angle, floating above a headline. TV Guide put it on the cover. Newsweek used it in illustrations. Late-night comedians made bits about it. The hat had become bigger than the actor wearing it, and everyone in the industry knew it. Hagman understood exactly what was happening. He leaned into it. He wore variations of that hat to award shows, to talk show couches, to press events across 2 continents. He knew the joke, and he knew the value. and he did not fight either one. He negotiated a raise that made headlines. He posed for photographs in the hat that had, by then, become almost a corporate logo. The most famous cliffhanger in television history was sold, in part, on an accessory. But that kind of fame comes with a bill, and Hagman had been warning himself about it since the first day he agreed to put the hat on. Here is the part that is genuinely a little sad. Larry Hagman spent the first half of his career trying to escape Major Nelson. He built J.R. Ewing specifically to bury that image. And it worked. He escaped the astronaut. He escaped the sitcom. He escaped the nice guy typecasting that had followed him around Hollywood since 1965. And then, without meaning to, he walked straight into the exact same trap, wearing a bigger hat. For the rest of his working life, Larry Hagman was J.R. Ewing. Every guest appearance referenced it. Every talk show host asked about it. Every director who cast him wanted a version of that grin. He would show up in a film or a made-for-television movie, and audiences would wait for the drawl, wait for the smirk, wait for the hat. Even when he was playing something completely different, part of the audience never fully let him leave South Fork. The 90s came and went. The 2000s came and went. He kept working, but he never really left the ranch. In interviews over the years, Hagman spoke about that trade openly and without much regret. He knew what the role was going to do to his career shape. He had watched it happen to other actors of his generation. He decided the exchange was worth it. The money was extraordinary. The reach was global. The fun of playing a character that gleefully rich and gleefully awful was, by his own account, one of the best experiences of his working life. He was not bitter about the box. He had built the box on purpose. But the box was still a box. The hat that had freed him from one prison had quietly built him another. And when the original Dallas ended its run on CBS in May 1991, after 13 seasons and more than 300 episodes, Hagman carried JR with him into every project that followed. The character had outgrown the show that made him, and when the show finally came back, that hat had one more chapter left in it. In 2012, TNT brought Dallas back, a new generation of Ewings, old faces returning. Hagman was in his early 80s by then, and he was ill. He had been public about his health battles for years, going back to a liver transplant in the 90s that he had spoken about openly to help others. He filmed the reboot anyway. Same grin, same drawl, same Stetson, even older, even thinner, even visibly tired between takes. He wore the hat like nothing had changed, because for him, and for the audience, nothing really had. Larry Hagman died on November 23, 2012, in Dallas, Texas, during production of the show's second season. He was 81. The reboot's writers now had to do something they had spent decades quietly dreading. They had to bury J.R. Ewing. The funeral episode aired on March 11, 2013. It was called J.R.'s Masterpiece. Original cast members returned for it. Old friends, old enemies. Patrick Duffy as Bobby. Linda Gray as Sue Ellen. Charlene Tilton as Lucy. They stood around a coffin and said goodbye to a character viewers had been arguing with, laughing at, and secretly rooting for since 1978. And resting on top of that coffin, in the shot the show chose to hold on for an unusually long beat, was the hat. Just the hat. Polished wood beneath it. Soft light above it. No smirk. No boardroom. No punchline. A piece of costume treated like a piece of the man, because at that point, the audience understood that they were the same thing. The prop viewers used to laugh about had become one of the most recognizable objects in television history. And in the end, it outlived the actor by design. The camera did not need to cut to a photograph, or a title card, or a montage of clips. It just held on the hat. And every viewer who had grown up watching Dallas on a Friday night in 1980 understood exactly what the shot was saying. That is the strange thing about old television. The shows fade from prime time. The networks change hands. The soundstages get torn down or repurposed for something no one will remember in 20 years. The audiences who watch the first run become grandparents. The reruns move from CBS to cable to whatever streaming service happens to own the rights this month. The TV guides get thrown out with the recycling. The VHS tapes stop playing. The theme songs get lost in the shuffle of 1,000 other theme songs. Whole seasons that used to feel like appointment viewing become search results on a menu screen, buried 3 scrolls deep, waiting for someone who still remembers to look for them. But some images do not move. They stay exactly where you first saw them. A wood-paneled den. A console television with a slightly warm hum to it. A Friday night at 9. A theme song rolling in over an aerial shot of a Texas ranch that most of the show was not actually filmed at. A man in a white hat sitting in a boardroom that was really a soundstage in California. pouring a drink and grinning at somebody he was about to ruin. Larry Hagman knew what he was doing when he put that hat on in 1978. He knew it would trap him. He knew it would define him. He knew that decades later, at his own character's fictional funeral, the camera would rest on that Stetson and the audience would understand without a single word of dialogue. He wore it indoors because it was smarter than anyone gave it credit for. It framed his face. It shaped the light. It sold the geography. It carried the show across languages and borders. It became the logo of the biggest cliffhanger in television history. And when Larry Hagman was gone, it stayed behind, sitting on a coffin lid in an episode that most of the people who watched Dallas at 9 o'clock on Friday nights in 1980 probably never expected to see, in a decade they never expected to reach. The console television is gone. The wood paneling is gone. The TV guide with JR's face on the cover is in a box in somebody's attic, if it is anywhere at all. But that hat, cocked at exactly the right angle, catching exactly the right light, is still there, waiting in the memory of anyone who ever sat down on a Friday night to watch a Texas oil man they were not supposed to like, and slowly realized, over 13 seasons, that they could not look away from him, which was, from the very first take, the entire point.